This talk is about how we decoded the Bible, how it all started and where we've got to. So it all began with Daniel 4 and this dream and the interpretation of John Aquila Brown that one chapter, one account in the Bible could have two fulfillments, two symbolic meanings actually. A dream could have a symbolic meaning relating to King Nebuchadnezzar and a further symbolic meaning relating to Jesus Christ. And that the phrase 7 times could stand for 2,520 years. As I mentioned in the previous talk, Bible scholars from the 4th century through Isaac Newton to today understood that the 3.5 times in Revelation 12, well, they misunderstood actually, that it could be 1260 days. It can be 1260 days, but the two are not the same in Revelation 12 actually. And they also understood that a day could stand for a year. In certain contexts, they hadn't seen it generally. They saw it in certain chapters of Daniel and they saw it in certain chapters of Revelation, and that's as far as it went. So I thought, well, wait a minute, if in Daniel chapter 4, if 7 times can mean 20 years in that chapter, then what about Genesis 4, where it says, what it says is, anyone or everyone killing Cain will be avenged 7 times. And so Jehovah set up a sign for Cain in order that no one finding him should strike him. So I looked at that and I thought, well, in the literal meaning, this is a vengeance penalty from God for any man who killed Cain. He'll be avenged for 7 years. In other words, for the 7 years after Cain killed Abel, anyone who killed Cain would be avenged, which meant he would die himself. So there was a death penalty on anyone who killed Cain during the 7 years after his killing of Abel. And the reason it was a 7-year penalty is that actually there was another penalty, that you should be banned for 7 years from God's people for murder. It's a 7-year excommunication basically for that crime, because Cain actually says, I'll be banned and I won't be able to see your face and I'll have to be a wanderer and a fugitive, because he was chucked out of Adam's family as well. So he was chucked out for 7 years, and during that 7 years he had this protection that anyone who killed him would himself have suffer a death penalty. And I thought, Cain was a murderer from God's people. Let's take him as symbolising all of God's people, who were in fact descendants of Adam, who murdered himself because he knew what he was doing when he ate the fruit, and of Eve, who conspired with Satan to murder her husband. So it's not a giant stretch to take Cain, who was a murderer from God's people, to stand for all of God's people, who were descendants of a guy who murdered himself and a woman who tried to murder her husband. So Cain can justifiably stand for all of God's people, who were actually not just the sons of Adam, they were the covenant sons of Adam by this time. Adam had a salvation covenant. So that the sons who were interested in God could be saved and be part of the true religion, and pre-Adamics who were interested could be proselytes and could be converted and also become part of the true religion, which was Adam's sort of church covenant family. So just as Cain was banished from the land of his family and went to be a fugitive in the land of Nod for 7 years, so Adam and his family could be banished for 7 times from an Edenic, a paradise land, from God's land. And we call that the Exodenic times. And what it meant was there were 7 times, or 20 years, from the eviction from Eden to them going into the promised land, which was a re-entrance into one of God's lands. And once we saw that, because we knew when they went into the promised land, it was 1473 Nisan. Well, Nisan 15 is when they first ate from the fruits of the promised land. We knew that they must have been evicted from Eden 3993 BC Nisan 15, which meant Adam must have sinned 3993 Nisan 14. Then we added 6,000 years to the sin, and we got 2008 Nisan 14, and we knew that was the end of Michael's lease, and we thought that would be the end of the world. It was the end of the world. Judicially, it was the end of Michael's 6,000-year lease, the beginning of the 1,000-year sacred Sabbath. It was not the beginning of a sacred Sabbath for man. It's the beginning of the sacred Sabbath actually for the second Holy Spirit. And it was not the beginning of a secular Sabbath where we no longer have Satan as our Caesar. That was to take another 12 years. But nonetheless, we had discovered a further malediction of 20 years, this time not on the kingship, but on the land. Because God gives you three things when you're his people. You get a kingship from him, you get a priesthood from him, and you get some land from him. And so actually we realised that since there was a 7 times malediction on the kingship and also on the land, there had to be one also on the priesthood. And we realised that if you count back 20 years from Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit was poured out and God was reconciled with man and the gifts of the Spirit were given, you get to 120 years before the flood, basically, which is when God gave the decree to Noah that my Spirit shall not continue with man indefinitely because he sinned and because he's flesh. Therefore, his days will amount to 120 years. And that's an ambiguous statement, which first of all meant there's 120 years more before. Actually, it didn't mean that. It meant there's 120 years in a 960-year Adamic body before I changed it to a 480-year Adamic body. Actually, there were 118 years to the flood, as it happens. And it also meant that the eventual maximum age of a human would be 120 years, which was Moses' precise age, and everybody who was born after Moses lived for 120 years max. There's one French woman who claims to have lived for 122 years. She's dead now. But there's evidence that she rigged her age because she did this deal where she got a flat if she lived to a certain age. So it was in her interest to understate her age. Not that it's the first woman who it's been in her interest to understate her age, and there's other people who've put this on the web, that she wangled her birth certificate or bribed somebody and managed to appear a different age to what she was. She's the only one, incidentally, who's ever been verified as living more than 120 years. Let me go into a bit more detail about Cain and Abel and God's people. There was no death penalty recorded until the law of Moses. Under Moses, if somebody murdered or if somebody committed false worship, you could stone them, actually. That wasn't the case until the law of Moses. It wasn't the case in the wilderness, because in the wilderness all the men above 20 had already been sentenced to death, so they didn't need another sentence. And all the boys under 20, or all the people born in the wilderness, weren't under law because they weren't circumcised. So the first person to be executed and suffer the death penalty under law was in the Promised Land. So it was true that to suffer vengeance you have to wait 7 times. It was 20 years before you'd suffer vengeance for murdering somebody. This is the ambiguity of this expression. It says either everyone or anyone killing Cain, 7 times he'll be avenged. If you take Cain to be a murderer or a false worshipper among God's people, which is what Cain was, then anyone wanting to kill him has to wait 20 years. So it was 20 years after they left Eden, after the first sin, after Michael's lease began, after the world was founded. 20 years before there was a law which had a death penalty which was carried out. So there's another meaning there. If you want vengeance or a death penalty on a killer or a false worshipper, you had to wait 20 years for it, and that vengeance didn't occur until they got in the Promised Land. Cain had a penalty that he was evicted from God's people, and he had a protection in that there was to be no vengeance on him. And likewise, the whole of God's people had a penalty that they were evicted for 7 times from Eden to the Promised Land, and during that time they were in fact protected in the sense that there was no death penalty. But in the Promised Land there was a death penalty. Anyway, having realised that not only Daniel 4, 7 times is 20 years, but also Genesis 4, and having seen also the alienation times, and there's some scriptures in Leviticus that refer to that, we then realised, okay, 7 times anywhere in the Bible can mean 20 years, and not only that, 5 times can be 1800 years, 10 times can be 3600 years, 11 times can be 3960 years, and we ended up deducing 11 giant great prophetic times prophecies. We have the exegenic times, 3993 Nisan 15 to 1473 Nisan 15. We have the alienation times, 2488 Sivan 5 to 11 to 233 Sivan 5. The Pentecost, we don't know when it was in 2488 Sivan. We have the continuous Gentile times of Russell from 607 Tishri to 1914 Tishri. We've got the discontinuous Gentile times of John Aquila Brown, Russell, me and Dr. Stephen E. Jones, and that runs from 607 Tishri 15 to 2012 Tishri 15. We've got the discontinuous Israeli Gentile times of Leviticus 26, running from 586 Tammuz to 1948 Sivan 3, when the State of Israel was born, the Ben-Gurion Declaration, the founding of the modern State of Israel. That's from Leviticus 26. We've got the temple times from 1 Chronicles 21, which is 3 times, which is 1080 years from the day David bought the temple, which was 1048 Nisan 16, to Jesus rebuilding his temple, 33 Nisan 16. We've got Pharaoh's times, or Laban's times. It's the wage-changing times of Laban. It's from when Pharaoh started telling the Jews they've got to chuck their kids in the Nile to the end of Michael's release. That's 10 times. 3600 years from 1593 Nisan BC to 2008 Nisan 14, the end of the ARC world, end of Michael's release. Then we've got Lamech's times, which is 11 times. That's from 3928 Nisan 14, when Cain killed Abel, to 33 Nisan 14, when Caiaphas killed Jesus. Then we've got Abraham's times, which is 11 times, from 1943, when he crossed the Euphrates, to 2008 Nisan 14. But then that's the 11 times of the sacrifice in Genesis 14 of a 3-year-old female cow, a 3-year-old lamb, and a 3-year-old goat, and 2 birds. But then you have to add Abraham's execution of God's instructions, which are 20 months. So that takes you actually to 2019 Chislev 11, which was the end of the entrance into the first Abrahamic covenant, end of kingdom entrance into the first Abrahamic covenant. Then you have the false church times. That's the period between the end of the second true church as a true religion, 435 ER 21, and beginning of the third true church as a congregation, which is 1875 ER 21. Then you have the clarification times, which is the last prophet to get the word of Jehovah directly, Malachi. That was 502 Chislev 11 to the end of the clarification of God's word in the furnace of silver, which is when the 2 NCs finish their ascension and disappear off the planet for a while. That's 2019 Chislev 11. So we found 11 periods, and that was the treasure hunt of what we've so far managed to do with great prophetic times. Right, so that's one aspect of the code. I mean, everybody likes codes. They like, well, most people, they like murder mysteries, they like whodunits, they like investigative series. It's entertaining, it's interesting, they like playing games of that type. It's astonishing to me that no one has really got to grips with this book and seen the code, because it's not a great leap of intellectual brilliance to say, well, if 25-20 years is 7 times in Daniel 4, maybe it's also that in Genesis 4, and when you see that it is, perhaps it is in the whole book, and then you think, well, 7 times, what about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, what about them? You know, and that was my first decoding, which I sent to the Watchtower in 92 LL11, which freaked them out and worried them sick, because all they care about is, well, too many of them, all they cared about, not all of them, but too many. They just cared about preserving their power over 7 million people, not about decoding the Bible and doing God's will. They don't obey the first law, they didn't, and they don't at all now. Alright, so here's some more fun aspects of the code. This one's called binary questions. And here is the classic binary question. It's in John 11. Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in the day? Or there are 12 hours in the day, are they not? And then he said, if anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. And the answer to that is, well, there are 12 hours in a daylight day, but there are 24 hours in a calendar day. And the daylight day ends at darkness, and the calendar day ends at sunset, and those are the 2 evenings. And in the scriptures, when it says between the 2 evenings, it means between sunset and darkness. Anyway, Jesus asks, are there not 12 hours in the day? And the answer is, well, it's true there are, if it's a daylight day, and it's true that there aren't, if it's a calendar day. And in general, any question, any yes, no, or any binary question asked in the Bible, both answers are true. And that's a very useful part of the code. So let me give you some examples of an application of that. Nicodemus said to Jesus in John 3, verse 4, he said, "How is a man able to be generated or born again when he's old? He's not able to enter into his mother's womb a second time and be born, is he?" And, well, of course, literally, no, you cannot re-enter into your mother's womb and be born. But symbolically, yes, that is precisely how you're born again as an angel. You enter into your angelic mother's womb and you're born from a second womb as an angel. And actually, it's how one is resurrected as a non-Adamic human from Hades. If you go to Hades, when you're resurrected, you don't come back in precisely the same Adamic aging body that you went to it in. That's finished. You die once, and that's the end of Adam's death penalty. You come back in a different body, which is a clone, but it's non-Adamically gene-zapped. It's the non-Adamic version of you. So had Adam never sinned, and all of the descendants, including your parents, been non-Adamic, it's how you would have turned out to be. It's in fact what Jesus was. Jesus was a non-Adamic version of the son of Joseph and Mary. So in that way you become a son of your original mother, who is now non-Adamic like you, because she's going to become non-Adamic too. So you do actually kind of end up back in having effectively re-entered the womb of a non-Adamic version of your mum, because you're born again as a non-Adamic version of what you were from a non-Adamic version of what she was. So it's a sort of self-answering question, but the point is, when there are two options in a question, both are true. That's how all the scriptures are written. Here's another one. Paul asks in Romans 8, "Who will file accusation against God's chosen ones? God is the one who declares them righteous." Meaning, rhetorically, no one should do that because God's declared them righteous. But actually, there was someone who filed an accusation against God's chosen ones. It was me. I wrote a letter to them saying that the faithful slave is going to be cut in two because he screwed up. And that eventually resulted in me being thrown out. But that didn't stop them being cut in two. In fact, that's how they were cut in two, really, partly. And Pilate, he inquired of Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Well, of course, at the time, no, he wasn't. But eventually, yes, he will be the king. In fact, he was never the sacred king of the Jews, the genetic Jews. But he is presently the sacred king, the heavenly sacred king, of the sons of Jacob by covenant, who are the spiritual Jews. So yes, he is the king of the Jews, and he will eventually be Caesar to the saints, who are the spiritual Jews, who are the sons of Jacob by covenant. So the answer to that is yes, no and yes. Jesus actually answered by saying, "My kingdom is no part of this world." He didn't say, "No, I'm not the king of the Jews," actually. He says, "If my kingdom were part of this world, my attendants would have fought so that I should not be delivered up to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from this source." He does have a kingdom. It's not from this world. It's going to be in the ark, and it's from the next world. And in the ark, he's the king of the Jews, because all the saints will be in the ark, and he will be their Caesar, and he will be the Caesar of the Jews from that point. Here's another one. "So Pharaoh said to his servants, 'Can another man be found like this one, in whom the Spirit of God is?'" Genesis 41. There's a rhetorical question. He was referring to Joseph, and the answer is yes, there's a greater Joseph. The guy who interprets the 3 baskets and the 3 bunches of grapes to refer to 3 Passovers, bread and wine, and the guy who gets the 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows. I don't get all of that, nowhere near it. But one of them I get, which is that Pharaoh stands on the bank, which is the one in sees Jesus' wife after they've been passed over and when they're reconstituted and cleaned up, rebaptized, prepared for marriage. They stand on the bank having been dipped in the river, and they see 14 months worth of cows ascending into Zoa. And those 14 months go from Sivan 14, which is the completed first watched up Passover, or if you like, they go from Sivan 11, the beginning of the 3rd present, to 2019 to 2020, Ab 10, the last day of kingdom salvation, when the last prophet of Baal is seized. Here's another one. This is a good one. "Still many of the crowd put faith in him, and they commenced saying, 'When the Christ arrives, he will not perform more signs than this man has performed, will he? They were saying, of course, nobody could do more signs than this guy. But actually, when the Christ arrives again, he'll perform more signs in that coming, which is in the third presence, than he did in his first. We can look forward to that. And then Abraham inquires of God, saying, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And he didn't do that. He got Lot and the daughters out of Sodom, and then he swept away Sodom. But in the greater meaning, there are righteous swept away with the wicked. Because all those who are saved, who are sons of Abraham, who enter into the first Abrahamic covenant during the kingdom, are sealed by the Omega covenant of Jesus Christ. And that covenant was, Jesus made it with actually the robber crucified with him, with the faithful one, when he said, truly I tell you today you'll be with me in paradise. And that guy had done nothing but sin his whole life. But at the last minute, he showed faith, and that was sufficient. And the last minute, last chance saloon guys, there's a whole covenant for them. And the covenant is that you die like Jesus did, but then you get resurrected as he did. So they will be swept away to Hades with the wicked, but they'll be resurrected straight back into the kingdom. So there's the answer to that. The largest one of these yes-no binary questions is Paul in 1 Corinthians 12. He says, God has set the respected ones in the congregation. First apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then powerful works, gifts of healing, helpful services, abilities to direct different tongues. He says, not all are apostles, are they? Not all are prophets, are they? Not all are teachers, are they? Not all perform powerful works, do they? Not all have gifts of healings, do they? Not all speak in tongues, do they? Not all are translators, are they? And what that means is, at some point, everybody is going to be an apostle, a prophet, a teacher, a powerful worker, a gifts of healing and speaking. The whole congregation is going to be full of these guys. I'm not quite sure whether one person can be all of these, or whether everybody in the congregation is one of these. But basically, there'll come a time, actually, I think there'll come a time when everybody can do all of this stuff, which is, again, rather like when Jesus, surely when the Christ comes, he won't do more miracles than this chap, will he? Well, yes, because all the people in his church are going to be able to be apostles, prophets, teachers, powerful workers, healers, tongue speakers and translators. All of them. I mean, not all at the same time, but all having all those capabilities. Right, there's another part of the code. Here's the next part of the code. We call it the designations principle. In lots of accounts, you get stuff like this. There's one character, like in Daniel 4, central character, Nebuchadnezzar, and he's referred to as Nebuchadnezzar the king. King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar the king and Lord. And in the literal meaning, it's all the same guy. It's King Nebuchadnezzar, the Lord of Daniel. But in the greater meaning, it's all different people. In fact, in the greater meaning, the king is Jesus, the Lord is First New Covenant saints, Nebuchadnezzar is me, and King Nebuchadnezzar is me as a king, and actually Daniel is you, if you correctly see the symbolism of Daniel 4. Likewise, Joshua 6 refers to the ark as the ark of the covenant, the ark of Jehovah, and the ark of the covenant of Jehovah. In the literal meaning, all those designations describe one acacia wood box made by Bezalel. But in the greater meaning, in our current understanding of the account, the ark is the ark of Noah, the ark of Jehovah is Zoah. It marches around the city and is carried, which is the final true church, the non-Adamic version of it. The Ark of the Covenant is the salvation covenant that saves the unsanctified, and the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah is the salvation covenant that saves the sanctified. But whenever you get that in an account, it happens a lot, you have to bear in mind in the greater meaning, when there's a different word used for the same character, it's a different character. Alright, now here's a fairly obvious one. We call it the numerical principle. In Genesis 40 and 41, Joseph interprets 3 twigs as 3 days, 3 baskets as 3 days, and 7 cows as 7 years. And the generalized version of that principle is the following. Any number of animals or things or people in the Bible can stand for that number of days, months or years in the greater meaning. So we just generalized it. If 7 cows can be 7 years, then 7 bananas can be 7 years, 7 people can be 7 years, etc. So here's the first example of it, one of my favourites. In 1 Chronicles 21 there are 1.1 million men drawing sword that Joab registers. He does a census of the people, which he's not happy about. And Joab gave the number of the registration of the people to David, and all Israel amounted to 1.1 million men drawing sword, and Judah was 470,000 men drawing sword. Now those 1.1 million men stand for 1.1 million days of first Abrahamic covenant entry, from the date when he presented the census to David, which was 1048 Nisan 14 BC, the start of the 3-day plague, to 1048 Nisan 16, which was the start of the 3 times of the temple times. It was 1080 years or 3 prophetic times before Jesus was resurrected as a human and rebuilt his temple, 33 Nisan 16. So 1048 Nisan 16 was when David purchased the temple floor from Ornan the Jebusite, which stopped the plague. Now incidentally, God's justice is perfect. This plague lasted 3 days and it killed 70,000 people. This is why it killed 70,000 people. Under the law of Moses, you were supposed to give a half shekel if you were being registered as a kind of poll tax, a registration tax to God. And the total number of people registered was 1.1 million plus 470,000, 1.57 million. And half a shekel times 1.57 million is about 750,000 shekels. And 70,000 people will be about 11 shekels per person. And the redemption value of a person was 3 to 5 when they were young, about 10 when they were old or something, and about 20 to 30 when they were middle-aged. So if the plague killed mainly the old and the young, which presumably it would, oh sorry, oh they don't register women, do they? They only register men. So 11 shekels per person would have got you to 70,000, about right. And that would be about right. If you get 10 shekels for an old guy, 3 to 5 shekels for a young guy, and 20 to 30 for a middle-aged guy. So, I mean, God is perfect in his justice. He would have exacted from the people, through this plague, the precise amount of money that they should have paid him. And David asked this wonderful question, which I don't think I quote here. He said, why don't you bring this plague on me and the house of my father? As regards these sheep, what have they done? And the answer is, they didn't pay a half shekel, which they knew under law they should have paid. So you'd have thought that just for not paying a half shekel, a death penalty is a little bit harsh. But I guess they're under the vengeance penalty, that the law had death penalties in it. And God resurrects, so you just get taken off the pitch for a while. Alright, so here's another one. In Exodus 14, Pharaoh goes chasing after the sons of Israel in his chosen chariots. He proceeded to take Pharaoh 600 chosen chariots, even all the chariots of Egypt. And there's a third man on all of them. And Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he went chasing after the sons of Israel, whilst the sons of Israel were going out in uplifted hand. Right, so this is 600 chariots with 3 men on each, and that counts as 4 for a chariot with 3 men times 600 is 2,400, or it counts as 600 plus 1,800, however you want to look at it. And they're days that run from 2013 Chislev 11, when Laodicea became Egypt to the sons of Israel. It was the end of the second presence. Saints need a water baptism, so if you leave a saint in a church without it, they're in a prison. It's Egypt. And 2,400 days takes you to 2020 Ab 10, and that's the last day of salvation for chosen charioteers. So that's a beautiful confirmation that there are 2,400 days from the end of the second presence to the end of salvation. Then we have the 144 cubits, the height of the wall in Revelation 21. It says in verse 17, also he measured its wall 144 cubits according to a man's measure, at the same time an angel's. Now, the 2NC Lord's Spirit baptism begins after the Third Holy Spirit is completed and installed at the Fifth Marriage Pentecost on 2019 Tishri 10. Normally it would begin on Tishri 10, but it can't, because Tishri 10 is Atonement Day, which is a mandatory Sabbath, and you cannot break that. And when you baptize somebody, you have to agree to go under law, and you cannot do that under a Sabbath. So it begins on 2019 Tishri 11, not Tishri 10. And it lasts 144 cubits, taking you to 29,805 a day for a cubit. And it's a man's measure and an angel's measure, because the 2NC Lord's Spirit baptism is the first time in history that men create angels. men baptise other men and those men are born again. Never happened before. It's always angels who've created angels and enabled men to be born again. Now, for the first time, for 144 days, men do it. Hence, it's according to a man's measure and at the same time an angel's measure. And here's another example which relates to the same subject matter. It's the 318 trained men of Abraham of Genesis 14. He took 318 trained men and went chasing after Lot, who had been captured by the 4 kings, Chedorlaomer and his 3 other kings. And he divided them into 2 groups. There's the earthly group, led by the third Holy Spirit through the 2 NC Lords, and the group in the ark. And actually, the group in the ark were sons of the FRC. They're all sons of Abraham, the whole lot. But they were sons of the FRC, and the group on the earth, other than the 2 NC Lords, are sons of the OMC, the Omega Covenant. And that they're the 2 groups of Abraham's forces divided in 2. And when you divide 318 by 2, you get 159. And 159 days from the end of the 2 NC Lord baptism on 2019 ADAR5 that we deduced from the 144 cubits, to the end of God's judgment on Adam 2020 AD14. And it says that they chased after them to Hobab, which means hiding place, which is actually another element of the code. When you get a Hebrew name of a person or a place, the symbolic meaning is related to the literal meaning of that name. So they chased after Lot and his family. They chased after them to recover them as far as Hobab, which means hiding place. And so in the greater meaning, they chased after them until some hiding place, which is the hiding place for Adam from God's judgment, which ends on 2020 at 14 when the last son of Adam dies, who's actually also a son of Abraham but never got sealed into the OMC. So 318 divided by 2 is 159, and that's the number of days from this division of his forces. Yeah, it's the number of days from the finishing of the 2 NC Lord baptism, which is the finishing of the division of the saints. The number of days from then to the finishing of the division, actually, between kingdom citizens and non-kingdom citizens. It's a period between 2 divisions. So it fits beautifully the symbolism. Alright, so that was the numerical principle. Then we come to the translation principle, which we just covered in the case of Hobab, actually, because the word means, as I said, hiding place. This translation principle is put beautifully in something that I've left out of these notes, which I will now get to. This is Acts 13 verse 6. But Elimas, the sorcerer, in fact, is the way his name is translated, began opposing them, seeking to turn the proconsul away from the faith. That is telling you a key to the Bible code. Because Elimas, the sorcerer, his name, when translated, means sorcerer. And that's how the Bible is written. It's a classic. So, for example, in 1 Samuel 11 it says Nahash the Ammonite proceeded to go up against Jabesh in Gilead. And well, what on earth does that stand for? Well, Nahash means serpent, and Ammonite means of the people, and Jabesh means dried up, and Gilead means witness heap. So what that is an internal corrupter, a serpent of the people, an internal corrupter of the watchtower, goes against Jabesh, dried up place of a witness heap, which is the watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses, a bunch of witnesses without a water baptism. So you've got a bunch of witnesses without a water baptism, that's Laodicea after it lost its water baptism, but in the watchtower, in a witness heap, and this serpent goes to corrupt them. Or here's another example. Aaron, the priest, proceeded to go up to Mount Hor, which means mountain of the mountain, and to die there at the order of Jehovah. Let's do the whole thing. In the 40th year, the going out of the sons of Israel from the land of Egypt. I put plural because Egypt's always plural, it's Mizraim, because it stands for Upper and Lower Egypt. In the 5th month, on the 1st to the month. Now, Mount Hor is mountain of the mountain, so that's administration within an administration. That's Laodicea. It's a hidden administration within an administration. It's a deep state, it's a clandestine administration. It's like the American deep state. This is the watchtower deep state. And he has to die to Adam, which is be baptized actually. And the word for year means shana, and well, you can take it to be a day. and it's actually the 40th day after the last 1NC reserve leaves the watchtower. The last 1NC reserve leaves the watchtower, 2,000 pigs of Mark 5, after they lost their water baptism. Because when a saint is in unclean flesh with no water baptism, he's unclean in the flesh, like a pig. He becomes a flying pig. He's got wings. So these flying pigs, they fly off the overhang, being flying pigs, of the false church into the sea in Mark 5, and they drown in the waters. That's the baptism of the third Elijah covenant. And there's 2,000 of them, so you count 2,000 days from 2013 Chislev 11, when the second presence ends, and you get to 2019 Sivan 30. And then 40th day after that is 2019 Ab 10, and that's when the last first new covenant saint can be baptized into the 3EC to marry Jesus. It's the completion of the Holy Spirit, actually. And Ab 10 is the 5th month, and it's not the first day of the month, it's the first Passover entry day of the month. Because it just says the first to the month. When the scripture says the first to the month, it can be the first anything to the month. You know, day, Sabbath, week, festival. At one point, I was going to use first opportunity of the month, but I think that's probably too general. And Aaron the priest, sorry, Aaron, not Aaron the priest, Aaron was the son of 123 years old, when he died on Mount Hor. Russell was sanctified 1889 Sivan 11, and Aaron died to Adam 2012 Sivan 14, when we all became non-Adamic. This is Aaron being 1NCs in Laodicea, and that is 123 years and 3 days later, or it's 123 secular year starts, Tishri 1 year starts later. Alright, so the point I'm trying to get to is the names of places and people tell you what their symbolic meaning is in the way I've described. Another lovely example of that is Cain and Abel. Cain means pierced, Abel means breath. Satan pierced Eve when he committed adultery with her to produce Cain. He didn't love her, he just pierced her. But Abel means breath because Adam French kissed Eve when he fathered Abel because he loved her. If you don't believe that Satan was the father of Cain, you can read 1 John 3 verse 12. Not according as Cain, out of the wicked one he was, and he slaughtered the brother of him. And thanks to what he slaughtered him, because works of him wicked was. This is a literal translation. The ones of brother of him righteous. Eve said at the birth of Cain, well, Genesis 4:1 says, and Adam had intercourse with Eve, his wife. It's very confusing. And she became pregnant, and she gave birth to Cain, and said, I produced a man with Jehovah. She didn't say, I produced a man with Adam. Adam did have intercourse with Eve, and she did become pregnant and produced Abel. And she gave birth to Cain, who she didn't produce with Adam, but she produced actually with Jehovah, because Satan was the head of the first Holy Spirit, God's first wife, at the time that he committed adultery with Eve. And the adultery he committed, it's a fascinating adultery. It wasn't with Eve, because Eve didn't commit adultery. She wasn't under any law, other than don't eat from the tree. She could have murdered her husband, which she did actually, pretty much, and she could have committed adultery, which she did, and she wasn't actually guilty of either of them because the only law she had was don't eat from the tree, which she managed to break because Satan conned her. But it says in the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, which is a fantastic collection, very short collection, of the understandings of the second true Gnostic Church. It says, but now he was created, that's Satan, and he begot, that's procreated with Eve. It says, what nobility is this? First adultery came into being, afterward murder, and he, Cain, was begotten in adultery, for he was the child of the serpent. So he became a murderer just like his father, and he killed his brother, Abel. Indeed, every act of sexual intercourse which has occurred between those unlike one another is adultery stroke bestiality. It's kind of cross-species bestiality, isn't it? You know, an angel inside a human should not have sex with a human. It's like a man screwing a goat or something. It's the wrong thing to do. For more, www.truebiblecode.com/code.html if you want the code. If you want the notes of this talk, it's /talks plural.html. Thank you.